Hi, I'm Nathan Case.
I'm Ryan Holland.
So we're going to go ahead and talk to you today about Security Hub. And now that it's GA, we've got a bunch of fun stuff to talk about. We're going to go through some of the best practices that we figured out over here.
Before we dive into the best practices, once you get the service already enabled, we thought we wanted to cover a little bit of a background because it is somewhat of a new service and there might be some folks that aren't very familiar with Security Hub and where it fits broadly in our security ecosystem. So you kind of see here we've mapped this to a NIST framework, and you see Security Hub actually shows up twice. And the reason for that really is that the product does more than one different function. So we're not only collecting and helping prioritize security findings from a whole bunch of different security services, both Amazon provided security services and partners, we're also helping you identify some compliance issues by looking at checks across all of your different accounts to make sure that your configuration meets different compliance standards. The current one that we have today is the Center for Internet Security Foundation benchmarks that check to make sure that your AWS account is meeting some good best practices.
It's kind of a nice thing to have too when you think about it.
It absolutely is.
It kind of gives you that ongoing auditability and making sure that you've got that green slate in front of you in the morning.
Yeah, the ability to see your compliance across all of your different accounts in a nice single dashboard is one of the features that customers have told us they really like about Security Hub. So just to kind of, again, give you a high-level overview, the way the service works is it's going to quickly assess and identify some of the high-priority security alerts that are coming from, today, we have 3 of our AWS security services, Amazon Guard Duty, which is looking at threat detection within your account or your instances, Amazon Macy, which is used to identify unusual behavior to S3 buckets or to do classification of PII within your objects. And then Amazon Inspector, which is looking for host-level vulnerabilities and configuration issues within your account. But also very importantly, we've integrated with a large number, over 30 different partner solutions that can also send findings into Security Hub and allows us to aggregate and prioritize those based on the source they came from, and then put those next to the automated compliance checks that you have in your account as well. The last part of this from an overview perspective is the taking action. So being able to not just have those findings come into your dashboard, but be able to respond to some of those in a hopefully automated way.
Some of the partner functions even allow you to do some of that. Which is...
We'll look at those here in a second. The main thing that drives the automation aspect of that is this idea of the Amazon finding format. So one of the biggest challenges when you start to look at security events from multiple different tools is normalizing that information and understanding where that falls from a normalized security score, but also the different types of findings, because an unusual behavior might not be as relevant from a security perspective as malware detection, for example. You might want to rank that higher than simply a vulnerability. So we've taken the security, the severity scores and normalized those across the different types of products and the different types of findings. But also very importantly, there's a consistent format for all the tools, which is one of the nicest things. It's a really big thing, especially when you start growing the ecosystem of partners that are interfacing with this. It allows you to have a place where you can aggregate all those findings and then consume them in a single format.
It's not like most of our enterprise customers have one security product that they use.
Almost always you're going to have more than one. And this allows you to get the output of those into the same exact security finding format, regardless of what tool generated those. And just to give you an idea of some of the partners that we have integrated, right? So I mentioned we have over 30. They're in lots of different categories, whether from firewalls to endpoint tools. And all of these tools either send information to Security Hub, and then some of them also retrieve information out. They'll use Security Hub as a means of doing that normalization.
Aggregation sort of a thing.
Yeah, the aggregation point, right? So if you're going to push them into a downstream system, this allows you to do that really easily. The other thing that this allows you to do is to take some responsive actions. So as I mentioned, some of the partners that we have for this are more consumers of those findings. So as these events are coming in, we send everything that comes into Security Hub back out the CloudWatch event bus, which allows you to create rules and to send them to things like step functions, for example, where with step functions, you can then decide based on that particular finding, what severity it has been assigned, what source it came from. You might want to send it to different places. It might want to send it to a Slack so the user gets a notification, Or maybe it's something very serious, you want to go to PagerDuty or something like that, where you can send an alert. And then also you could take automated responses. So we've seen some customers who will tie that into some automation where you might make some changes to your environment, for example, to fix the security problem versus just report on it.
It's a good topic to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah. One last thing we'll just talk about is the fact that Security Hub is globally available across 17 regions. You do get a 30-day free trial when you turn that on, and that free trial is per region and per account. And from the pricing standpoint, you can see the pricing on there. The first 10,000 findings are free for every month. And then the compliance checks that run are priced on the number of times those checks go on in your account. Cool. All right, so now that we've kind of given a high-level overview of Security Hub, let's dive into these 10 best practices that we have here. So the first one that I always come back with is when you turn this on, you need to make sure that you understand it's a regional service.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you've turned it on everywhere in an account, but also that you've turned it on all of your accounts.
Yep.
If you don't turn it on in an account, that's probably going to be the one that you wish you had.
It always works that way. Yes.
And from a regional standpoint, again, it is a regional service, like all of our services. And so you do need to make sure that you've enabled it across all of the regions. So that way you're seeing the compliance checks and you're also seeing the findings from any services that you have there.
That's really key. I mean, we've even got a script for it.
Yeah, there is. So if you go into our console, there's a Python script that we have on GitHub that we link to from the console that will take a list of accounts and it will automatically enable it on all of the accounts in all the regions for you. You can also choose a subset of regions if you'd like. But it also will set up the master member hierarchy. So we have a concept in the product where you can have a Security Hub master, which gets all of the findings from all of your accounts. And also can see the compliance checks across all your accounts.
Which is ideal. I mean, when we get into integrate later, we'll talk about that. But if I have all of these compliance checks and I want one place to look at it, how better to make sure that everything's actually doing what I expect it to do?
Exactly. And if you're not going to turn those services on in a region, then we would also recommend then to disable those regions using service control policies, which is another option. But primarily speaking, though, having these regions that you're not really using, even if you're monitoring, the cost should be very, very low because if you're not really using the regions, then there really shouldn't be much.
Well, that should really be kind of a threat detection moment for you. If you've got a region you're not using and you're not seeing any billing going on and all of a sudden you see a steep increase.
Exactly.
Maybe you ought to go look.
Something's going on there. So I think our next best practice is to make sure that you enable the different integrations that you have available. So GuardDuty is one of the primary ones that we see. And if you're using GuardDuty, you might already have the master member set up with GuardDuty.
I was going to say, it's kind of the same sort of thing.
It's very similar, and you can actually export the list of accounts from GuardDuty and use that to set up your Security Hub. So that way you can take the CSV file that you get from exporting from GuardDuty and use that to make sure that you have the same coverage, that you've turned on the same Security Hub in all the accounts and all the different regions as well. Also point out that Macie is automatically integrated well if you're using Macie. Inspector you have to enable it, right? So there's actually an option to enable or disable the inspector findings.
It's really easy to use too. I mean,
Very
it's got
easy.
a one button, click on and off you go.
Yep, one button and you're good to go. So make sure that you've not just only got our services turned on and integrated with Security Hub, but if you have third-party tools, right? So we have these partner integrations, and while we automatically enable our own services, we don't know if you're using a partner tool, so you have to go and enable those.
Actually do the full set of work.
Yep, and make sure that you tell us about that. Yep.
Cool.
I think our third best practice would be around using the compliance accurately. So these compliance checks are one of the biggest values that we've seen customers get out of the product, right? So the insights are really useful, but the compliance checks, we see a lot of people really liking that feature and using that. However, it does have a dependency on config. So we use AWS config rules in order to do a lot of the evaluations. That's how we can determine whether or not some of those checks pass or fail. However, we need the config recorder turned on in all the regions for all your accounts. Otherwise, we
Delta
can't.
is kind of hard to figure out.
Yeah, we can't tell you whether or not something's changed if the recorder's not actively running. So you do also need to have global events turned on right now in all the regions. So that's one other thing to keep in mind when you're going through these configurations. Make sure you got global events turned on. Make sure you have the recorder enabled in all the regions. And the good news is that script that we mentioned, if you use that, we will automatically go.
Magically does all of that for you.
Yeah, it'll recognize if a config's not turned on, it'll set it up for you. And if it is already enabled, then it'll just go by and keep that there.
Cool.
Also, right now the CIS, the Center for Internet Security, is our compliance check that we have, and that's enabled by default. We do allow you to disable it. However,
why would you?
I would say, the cost on this tends to be very minimal.
Yeah.
And I think the value that it provides is good to keep that enabled so you can get that dashboard of how you're compliant.
We'll kind of get into this a little bit too later, but looking at some of the compliance options that you have there with insights and whatnot, being able to go ahead and look at some of that more closely and say, realistically, are my CloudTrail logs going to an S3 bucket in the audit account, for instance, in a multi-account deployment, right?
Yep.
We have to make sure that's happening. How do we do that? We've got an insight panel here that lets us see down all the way to the bottom child account to make sure that's actually happening.
And you can see that across your entire organization, which is great too.
As a CISO, that seems like something you would like to have to go to sleep tonight.
It generally is.
Yeah.
I think our fourth best practice, I would say, is least privilege. And least privilege is always a good practice. However, it's really important in security tools, right? So there's a lot of information that's made available, especially when you get to the master account. So you want to make sure people that have access to that security master is the right people, right?
Yeah.
And then also keep in mind that those take actions that you can add, the custom actions, those are going to run with the permissions associated with the Lambda function downstream. So it's simply sending a CloudWatch event using Security Hub. So you want to make sure that the people who have access to trigger those actions should have that access as well.
Right.
Because they will have the permissions of that Lambda that's running. So
we just have to kind of make sure that we look at that multi-account deployment model and understand it from the customer's point of view, exactly who's supposed to be where.
Yeah.
And even the security guys really ought to just have that read-only access in that security account most of the time, unless they want to break glass and go fix something.
Exactly. Read-only tends to be probably enough unless there's a use case for that. And also, you do want to give the read access to the account owner because you want them to see their security issues because you want them to hopefully learn from those and prevent them.
Ideally, it would be nice for them to look at their production account and go, hey, look, that's a red line. Maybe we want to go fix that.
Yeah, exactly. So you do want to push that down there. We just want to make sure that the right actions are limited to people who actually need those particular actions. I think the fifth one, the last one I'll cover before I hand it off to you is making sure that you tag everything, right? So I always say tag everything is a best practice pretty much regardless.
Just in general.
In general, right? Tags are your friend. They not only give you context, but importantly in this case, you can also use those for permissions. With resource level permissioning, you can then tag the Security Hub for an account as non-production or sandbox.
Right.
And maybe in that case, I can have my IAM policies give more people access to that, or I'm less concerned about who has write privileges. But if I've tagged my Security Hub as a production account, now I want to maybe have a different set of administrators or a different set of users.
Next time Nathan logs into the production account and starts making extra users, we want to go ahead and say maybe that's a red flag.
A red flag, yeah.
Yeah, maybe we want to not let that happen.
Yeah, so making sure that you're tagging the Security Hub resource as well, and then use that when you define those IAM policies that get you the least privilege.
I think that's really a great way to look at the threat detection too. If we've got a DevSecOps, or even if you're on your way to DevSecOps, because it's really hard to finally make it all the way to the end of that path. But as we go down that line, we need the ability to say, hey, look, we've got an account here that's halfway in between. And it's okay for you to be in there, but not me.
Yeah.
Ryan's okay, Nathan's not. And we can actually start checking those actions in CloudWatch.
Absolutely.
So cool. That kind of brings me to mind, frankly, is that's integrate. And it's really just to integrate with your partner solutions. So many enterprises out there just don't have one thing that they use. They have a whole bunch.
Most of our customers have a handful of tools.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you start tagging the resources that we've talked about so far and you start integrating with all of these other products, not only am I going to be able to shove more information into Security Hub, but I'm also going to be able to take that information and put it into those partner products. So we have any number of Demisto-esque or any of the other partner products that actually go and do something post an event. Now I can look at that playbook and see what happens when that's going to happen, right?
Excellent.
I want to open that playbook up and say, hey, look, I've got an EC2 instance that started up, but it's got Bitcoin mining on it. Maybe we ought to go ahead and shut that down now, as opposed to let it run all weekend. Not that that's ever happened before.
But also, I think too, understanding which tools we have partnership with already. I mean, like I said, there's over 30.
30 plus.
And we're going to continue to add to. I know we have a lot of partners that are looking to add to that. So make sure that you're on top of that and you understand when we add new partners. If it's a tool you're using, you want to make sure that you add that to Security Hub.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes to communicate. So one of the things that I always harp on in the summit talks that I give is if you're going to do incident response, you have to make sure that you communicate. And Security Hub gives you the ideal central point to communicate from. Now we've got everything aggregated into one place, and I can go and reach out and say, hey, incident response team, this is an issue. We need to talk about it right now. Or maybe it's just informational. Maybe it's just, hey, Ryan logged in from California and New York at the same time. Maybe that's not okay.
It's not even really informational.
You know.
But also that's the nice thing about that master member too, is you can do that from that central account instead of trying to collect logs from across all your different accounts.
Absolutely. So now we get into respond, the fun part. This is kind of where all of the bits that we've talked about for compliance and everything else kind of all start wrapping together into one thing. We've got to make sure that the governance policies that we've talked about with our lawyers, with our HR department, with our compliance people, this is where we're going to turn that into code and actually begin to start looking at what happens in these accounts. Yeah. If we've got a production account that has production data, maybe it's PCI, maybe it's HIPAA, maybe it's something we need to worry about. If it's just a development account and we've tagged it as such, then we have to care less. Maybe we need to go ahead and clean that account out, delete a user or two. But if it's a production account, we can treat those two things differently. So as we start looking at how we're going to respond to things in Security Hub, we can go ahead and use the tagging that we've talked about. We can use all of the other communication options that we've got. Are we sending out to Slack? Are we sending out to PagerDuty? What's going on? Are we sending out to the company SIM? Right? We've got all of that mushed together. Now we can go ahead and start building these wonderful playbooks, these run books that actually let us figure out. We used to build them on paper. Now we can actually build them in Python.
Well, there could be situations too where I might be okay with an automated response to a compliance check.
Absolutely.
Right. So I might just turn that back. Right. Whatever you did that moved that out of compliance, I might just go ahead and put you back. But
maybe we shouldn't have port 22 open to the world.
But an alert that comes from a system, from a tool, that might need someone to actually go do an incident response. Yeah. So you need to make sure too that you're not, all one size fits all in those,
absolutely.
those responses.
That's always the rough part there. You've got to make sure you go through that compliance regime, honestly, before you actually get to the point of automatically responding. And that generally looks like, I think you said it before, actually, what happens for the first 6 months. Let's go ahead and just take a look at it. Let's get an idea of what's going to happen when this goes off.
Kind of like running a WAF rule in detect mode or something.
Let's just make sure.
Yeah,
we don't want to delete the system just yet. We just want to look at what would happen if, right?
Excellent. Yeah.
So cool. This brings us to number 9. Number 9 is really this concept of iteration. We talk about it in DevOps all the time. We talk about it in development. We spend a lot of time talking about it in a lot of the stuff that we do internally at AWS. How do we iterate? How do we grow on this thing that we've just done? And like we just talked about in Respond, chances are you didn't get it right the first time.
Yeah.
And sometimes catastrophically so. Make sure that you iterate. We have to start with something that we can recover from. Even if it's just an email that say, hey, if we had done this, by the way, we would go ahead and reboot system instance ID. Cool. I need to know that as the development manager. I need to know that as the product manager. Let's figure out how we can iterate on this so it actually makes sense.
Yeah. Also, too, we give you the ability to create custom insights. So
that's true.
As you start using the tool and you're starting to get more and more information out of it, there might be insights or things that you want to track. And so make sure you're creating those and looking at the different fields and stuff that are coming
And you can use them as a template, which I thought was kind of neat. You can template this and start building off of it. And I know for mine, when I did it internally, just working on some of the run books that I was trying to build out of the box, it was great to go ahead and build out the initial, or just use the template rather, and then start adding different rules to it and see what would happen.
Yeah.
But from my point of view, I think this iterate piece is kind of the most have courage, go out and do something type of a moment, right? You've got to go out and try this. And the first time you do it, it's not going to work exactly the right way. Yeah. Just iterate, you'll get there.
Especially on those responsive actions.
Oh gosh, yes.
Because you're never going to get directly to the magic action that fixes everything for you, right? And
there's no such thing, right? Let's be honest.
And again, a lot of those times it might be a combination of making the job of the human a lot quicker by automating the collection of information or automating some set of tasks.
Like we talked about with forensics even. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
You might still want that person involved, but you might be able to find that person, their first 10 things they do is always the same. Can we automate that portion of that to make that shorter?
Let me go grab the cloud trail. Let me go grab the logs. Let me go put the EBS volume in a bucket, use DD, make sure everything's over here. And then the next morning I wake up at 9 o'clock. I go look, I've got a forensics job to do. At least I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Off we go. All right, so that brings us to number 10. Number 10 is really quite simple. It's enable Security Hub. Yay! So Security Hub is just like GuardDuty is. It's got the 30 days free. Allows you to go ahead and turn on Security Hub, take a look at what's going on, review the costs, understand what that's going to look like long term for you, and give you a better idea of what's going to happen, which
it's also a good spot to really, before you go down that path, think about how it is you're going to consume those. Where am I going to send those? Once we talked about the partner integrations or sending them to step functions to trigger downstream, have an idea before you actually start that trial. Where am I going to send these? Do I have a SIM or do I have
a run book?
Yeah, do I have a tool that I know I want to send them to?
Right.
And start building that ahead of time, because you don't want to just turn it on and get your free trial and then realize at the end of the trial
you didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything with it, and now you have this pile of data that you need to go back with. So I would say try to make sure that when you're enabling this, you have an idea and you've already put some thought into where you're going to send them, what you're going to do with those, who should be the recipient of those findings. One of the nice things about this is because it doesn't really make any changes to an application level of anything, you can turn these on in an account without really having any impact. There's no impact.
It's kind of like guard duty from that point.
Exactly. Same like guard duty.
One of the things that always is interesting to me is I get this question from the customer of, well, when I turn on guard duty, what happens?
Yeah.
Well, nothing happens. It doesn't run on your side. And this is the same sort of thing.
Same sort of thing.
You can turn it on. There's no impact to your stuff.
Exactly. Which makes it nice. You can turn it on without having to get agreement from a lot of people. However, it also means that sometimes we see people, they turn it on everywhere and no one's really looking at it. So you do need to make sure you have a plan.
And it does bring it back to heart for me because eventually what I see is customers that call me in for incident response. We talk and they show me their guard duty and they've turned it on once. They've seen a bunch of red and they've turned it back off because they were scared.
Yeah. So make sure that when you have it on, you're actually
you have to do something with it.
Yeah. That you're consuming them and that you're sending them somewhere where they're going to get noticed.
I think a good first step is, have your SA in. Talk to your SA, talk to your enterprise support person, talk to your TAM, figure out what you're going to do with it with them, and then have them send you up for a well-architected review. It's a totally free way to sit down and actually have somebody review and make sure that you're using the stuff that you should be using the right way.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I mean, as far as things go, practice 10 is
it's kind of the easiest one.
Yeah.
So we have that script to make it pretty easy for you as well. So
it's all there. And we can talk a little bit about multi-account. When you look at this, make sure that you turn it on from the master account and then you run it from there. And you go ahead and take a good look at it from the multi-account view. Don't just turn it on in one region.
Yep.
Make sure you turn it on all your accounts. Make sure that you integrate with your partners, right? Make sure that you've integrated with all the internal AWS stuff, right?
Yep.
We've got make sure that you communicate it, right? We have make sure that you iterate on the policies that you've done and make sure that you respond to the policies that you've got.
Sure. Yep, those are all, I think, excellent best practices.
Makes a good bookend.
Excellent. Oh, great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar on best practices with Security Hub. You also can go to the Security Hub product page to get more information and see the documentation. It's also where you can find the one click to enable Security Hub on your account as well. And now we'll take some questions from the audience.